The notion of subscription has been around for much longer than digital SVOD. And the core brain trust that RLJ Entertainment had come out of the subscription business from magazines and other forms of subscription. And I think they really focused on their understanding of customer behavior.
Hi, everybody. For today's episode of Retention Zone, the video podcast focused on monetization in streaming, I have from the US, Titus Bicknell, with quite an experience in the world of media. Hi, Titus.
Hi, Carlo. Nice to meet you.
So tell me a bit about yourself first, and then we'll deep dive into some streaming monetization matters.
Certainly. So I've been in the media and entertainment space for 25, almost 30 years, and started building mobile video experiences back in the early thousands. And as a result of that, moved through working for Discovery, where I ran engineering in the product management office as we built out online video experiences, and then moved into the kind of infancy of the SVOD space with an organization called RLJ Entertainment in 2014. RLJ Entertainment subsequently became part of AMC Networks in 2018, and I was there for another 5 years.
So it's pretty long experience in an evolving, I think, sector, which is always fascinating because very often when you are in the pioneering times, it's where you can explore and experiment more freely than I think where you know about your business. But I know it's an interesting story moving from kind of physical media to SVOD. Tell me the story that I know it's fascinating for our audience, I think.
Certainly. So RLJ Entertainment, when I joined them in 2014, had been a very successful direct-to-consumer catalog business, originally with VHS, then Laserdiscs even, but essentially a DVD business. And that experience of understanding exactly what a customer was buying out of the catalog month after month and understanding the demographics and understanding what those customers wanted, RLJ Entertainment recognized that there was an opportunity as streaming rights started to become available to offer an SVOD service. And so when I joined the organization in 2014, Acorn TV had been in existence for a couple of years. It was a small audience base, but it's a fascinating audience growth story in that they started by saying to their customers in the physical media space, we're not going to sell you a subscription. We're going to ship you a device, a Roku stick, with Acorn TV on it. And so it was a way of seeding a market who weren't used to the technology. And the demographic for British content tends to be older. So, a concern around the technical barriers of getting up to speed with a device. But it was a fascinating way of starting that audience and moving them based on what their content consumption habits were, from buying DVDs to consuming that content through a streaming service. And so that business, when I joined, was about 50,000 subscribers. What was interesting is a lot of those subscribers joined because the catalog business said, if you subscribe to this SVOD service, we'll give you free shipping. So it was Amazon Prime before Amazon Prime.
Oh, wow.
But over time, their consumption habits meant that the audience grew. They were very quick to recommend the service to their friends. So that viral marketing piece of it was extremely valuable. And between 2014 and 2018, when RLJ Entertainment was fully acquired by AMC Networks, the audience grew from 50,000 subs, as I said, to more than 1 million.
Oh, wow. That's a huge, crazy jump.
Absolutely.
So I can imagine the data. Sorry, I'm instantly driven thinking about the data aspect of it. So the audience data aspect. So how would you manage 1 million compared to 50,000? How did you see transitioning the strategies for acquiring, retaining customers?
So I think the useful thing about that path was that the experience was driven by an extremely talented subscription-based audience team. The notion of subscription has been around for much longer than digital SVOD. And the core brain trust that RLJ Entertainment had come out of the subscription business from magazines and other forms of subscription. And I think they really focused on their understanding of customer behavior first and foremost, rather than, in a sense, being distracted by the technology and the notion that the technology was somehow going to make that subscription business easier. It doesn't. It's just as difficult or as easy, quote unquote, as any subscription-based business. And I think what was very interesting to watch was the catalog didn't go away instantly. You know, it was the recognition that for some people, the medium and their subscription to that content, because, you know, this is series-based content, you knew that the audience would come back when the next season dropped, either to buy a new DVD box set or to resubscribe or continue their subscription to the SVOD service. So that the key business fundamentals were unchanged. We were simply saying, this is a different medium. It's a different packaging. And I think that was key to understanding how to interpret the data. And in the same way that they would say in 2012, 2013, we sold this many DVDs of this series, we should let, you know, the producers of this series know that it has a big US-based audience, or an audience quantifiable in this way because of units shipped, translated into how many streams of that episode. Did we see episode to episode, you know, retention of the audience, or did it drop off between episode 3 and episode 4? And all of those pieces of data suddenly became incredibly informative to determining commissioning decisions or renewal decisions for content that we were acquiring predominantly out of the UK, but not exclusively.
So I think in theory, did you see, you said everything was difficult or easy, and it's the same, difficult or easy now. But do you see the clearly more richness of data really driving better strategies, or there is more complexity still?
Well, I'm a believer that more data is always better than less data. But I think the key follow-on to that statement is it has to be actionable data.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of organizations are now drowning in their own data lakes. And are unable to decide which key metric is the one that's actually going to help them alter the course of their business successfully. So data for data's sake is a dangerous way to go. Yes, we have much more understanding of consumption. You know, I can ship you a DVD. I have no idea if you even unwrap the cellophane, let alone put it in your DVD player and watch it. But I know that if you come to Acorn TV or one of the subscription services that I had the honor to work on, I know exactly how long you engaged with that episode. I know exactly the moment in the episode where you paused or you dropped or you didn't come back. I know exactly when you scrubbed forward and missed a bit. So all of that information is critical and fascinating to content producers and to, you know, in a sense, the content creation side of the business. It's really about whether or not you've got enough time to analyze it, be sure that these aren't, you know, statistics that are unhelpful because the sample size is too small or there's an anomalous piece of behavior. And I think that's where the data science piece of this becomes very interesting in the SVOD business.
No, absolutely. Especially when you have so much sophistication in the data, the actionability becomes core in making use for your objectives. In the end is, you know, I think obviously thinking about retention, trying to forecast when people are starting to consume less in a way that is a pattern, and you think we need to take care of this customer because something is happening here, et cetera, et cetera. And so from a US perspective, where do you see the streaming media market, which is in constant evolution, or whatever word you want to use these days? What's your view of the current status of the market in the US?
Well, I think we've reached a fascinating tipping point. The last 5 years was clearly about audience growth. You know, the data being reported by all of the big players in the space was about sub numbers, not necessarily about revenue, and certainly not about margin. And you know, clearly there is a well-trodden path of saying you cannot fully monetize an audience until you've grown that audience. And if you have a large enough audience, very small changes to the economics make an enormous difference to the bottom line. But I think what was fascinating about, you know, that fateful day when Netflix reported for the first time that its quarterly sub number went down in Q4 of 2021.
I remember well.
Everybody does, yes. Most of this gray hair is from that day. I think it was a critical wake-up call to the industry to say, right, we can't just assume that more subs is better. They have to be the right subs. You know, and anybody in a subscription business looks at what kind of prospect profile does my new audience have? And are these good prospects? Are these prospects that I can believe a lifetime value or, an ARPU is going to be sustained by? But also, if I've made the assumptions about what that LTV is, how much investment do I need to make in the product, the content, the platform, the marketing, in order to ensure that people continue to part with their money month after month? And I think what's interesting there is some of the organizations out there are being able to respond more quickly to an imperative that says it's not any sub is a good sub. I'm starting to be more subtle about that decision and saying, well, actually, not every sub is a good sub, because on some subs, I'm losing money. Their consumption profile shows me that they cost me more to service than they're giving me in the discounted monthly or the coupon-based model. And so I think that's been a really important piece of saying, no, I will let you go as a subscriber because you actually aren't valuable to me. And that's an interesting moment for consumers, because I think there's been an assumption that if I just, go through the process of canceling, they'll send me an offer, I'll save money, I'll come back in. That mechanism is changing. And I think it's making how you run an SVOD business certainly more challenging, but perhaps more interesting.
See, for sure, what I notice is, and again, I want to think to see what you think about it. There has been a shift, if you want, from subscription numbers, revenue to margins, and depending where in the journey you are as a platform, also maybe from full focus on acquisition and starting a growing focus on retention, or good retention, because that's where you make the money in the end, especially with the cost of acquisition growing.
Yes, absolutely. I think as there's an inevitability to the cost of acquisition rising as the market becomes saturated.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've all enjoyed a phase somewhere between 2015 and 2020 where, you kind of tripped over a new audience and bang, there they were, and it was amazing. And you just looked at the reports month after month, and it was up to the right. It was never that simple, but at least the cost of acquisition was relatively low in the marketplace. I think what's interesting now too is that as SVOD as a product, certainly in the US, is beginning to look more and more like cable television has for the last 25 years, where you're disgruntled as a customer to see that now everything has got an ad in it. Yeah. Now, ads are a critical part of the economics of content consumption in the US. They always have been. We're aware of that. But I'm fascinated in some ways by the way in which that experience of consumption of content in the US is now so similar, whether I'm an SVOD subscriber or a cable TV subscriber or a terrestrial television consumer. And I think that's changing the way in which businesses look at that cost of acquisition, because they're now acquiring a customer not just for themselves as a subscriber, but as a viewer for their advertising partners. And that might change the demographic mix that they're looking at.
The latest move by Amazon is like the test bed for everything that mix with the complexity of Amazon being a much richer advertisement, maybe opportunity than other have because of the e-commerce part being connected. But clearly that's a test bed of where the money will come from. I think we will need maybe 2-3 months if they share something to understand how it goes. But that's super sophisticated. One thing that if you're like on the retention team, if you want, starting to see that one, you may lose customer that go back one layer to maybe an ad-supported free part of the platform and don't leave completely. On one hand, it's good because they stay in the family. Second, you're monetizing like a fraction with advertisement. So even the data that you use on your audience to define retention strategies becomes even more sophisticated if you're able to track all of that, I guess.
Yes, and I think from a value of data perspective, keeping a customer in the family, as you say, is more valuable than losing them completely.
Yeah.
The decision to churn may be price sensitivity, but you don't know for sure. But if you're offering them a cheaper tier, you do know. You start understanding that, okay, there's a percentage of my audience on the bell curve who doesn't want to pay full price, but actually if I'm offering them something that's 40%, 50% of that SRP, they'll stay around. What I'm fascinated by is to see the numbers 3-6 months out, where people decide to, as it were, go back to that premium level. And what are the drivers for that decision? And clearly, if they've stayed in the family throughout that period and you watch whether or not their consumption habits changed while they're an ad-supported customer, that might help inform what would be the trigger point for them coming back.
And in your experience, because I have this big thesis that to operate platform like that, to design and run platform, like successful platform like that, you need to find kind of a sweet spot where, if you want the marketing team or the audience marketing team, the product team, meaning product platform, the technology in terms of experience, etc., and the content team work very close together. Mm-hmm. It's my theory. I still have to, but I think the more we go deep in this kind of sophistication, the more it becomes crucial. If you operate as separate teams, I think it's too competitive. It's a luxury you cannot afford. But again, maybe your experience is a bit different. So,
no, I absolutely subscribe to that thesis. You know, the nature of running SVOD is kind of like squeezing a balloon. You know, if you put too much pressure on one side, it'll pop out the other. And I think, you know, one of the challenges to SVOD at scale, it's much like the arguments of Descartes around democracy, which is to say, above a certain scale, democracy doesn't work, because actually you need all the people in the room all the time to make the best decisions on behalf of a group. And it is absolutely true that RLJ Entertainment, as a smaller organization, all of those branches, all of those levers work together. You know, and we kind of refer to it as a three-legged stool, and without any one of those legs, the whole thing fell over. And I think the challenge for the very large streaming services is that at that scale, it's extremely hard to make decisions fast enough collectively. And so I think, you know, AMC was at an interesting scale where it was small enough to run in that way, big enough to leverage, you know, a much larger content budget and a much larger potential audience. But already, as you get to a certain size, the ability to have that conversation in real time across all of those branches becomes very difficult.
And do you think data science / machine learning AI are a practical, real advantage for what's going on from now on, in terms of understanding and taking action on audience data for retention purposes?
So I mean, the data science piece of it is critical, no doubt there. And, you know, my closest collaborators at AMC were the business intelligence group. The key, though, is not so much, do you have data? Are you able to process the data quickly? But do you understand your industry well enough to read the data? You know, in some ways, analyzing data is like reading tea leaves. You know, a pattern of data can tell you 37 different answers depending on how you view them. Mm-hmm. And I think what was most interesting to see is how a group who were deeply familiar with how ad-supported cable worked evolved their understanding of what the data meant when it was applied to a very different product. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is a slightly long way of saying data in and of itself doesn't tell the answer, nor therefore does machine learning or AI, because it's about how you train the model. And if you train an expert, human or computer, they need to know what the context is in which they're interpreting that data. Otherwise, you come to very, very incorrect conclusions.
And hallucination, as now it's very trendy to say, I think.
Yes, indeed.
So, and again, I think we can go on for a long time, but one final question, it's very fascinating, and I see a lot of alignment with my experience, to be honest. If you look at, I mean, from now on, what would you like to see happening in this space? You know, fast AVOD, SVOD, mix together. SVOD is dead. Netflix is doing super well, to be honest. So I'm not saying I don't want prediction, because prediction, to be honest, I'm normally trying not to do prediction. One is because I'm lazy, and two because that's. But what is your ideal evolution of this sector? As a consumer on one end, but also, I mean, as someone clearly super expert.
Well, I think within the industry, we operate at our peril if we do not occupy first and foremost our position as a consumer. Everything we do in the business should be informed by our own frustrations or pleasures or excitement about our consumer experience.
I agree.
And the reason I say that is, I think above all, I would like the industry collectively to focus on content discoverability. I, as a consumer, care about a show or a producer or an actor or a story. I don't want to have to go through 6 different apps to find it, or go, oh, is it SVOD, or have I got that subscription? Is this ad supported on FAST? When is it showing? I want some place, some individual environment in which I can find my show, and all the barriers to consuming it go away. And, there is great work that's been done across the technology platforms for universal search on whether it's Apple, Roku, Amazon devices.
Yeah.
But it's still an incredibly fractured audience experience, particularly in the United States, I think. And I think I'd love a focus on that industry-wide, perhaps even consortium-led, to say, how do we ensure that our customers can find our content? Because at the moment, I'm very confident that they don't know where it is, and they're frustrated by how difficult it is to find.
But I really agree with that. On the other end, it's also... It seems to me one of the reasons that, for example, Sky, especially here in Europe, is trying to keep this hardware thing, whatever it is, Sky Glass, that because it becomes a reason to become a destination and becomes a reason to aggregate everything. Because in a world where everything is an app, and I was super aligned with Tim Cook saying that the future of TV is apps on one end. But in that world, there's no one destination if not the App Store. And the App Store is everything, is not only media. So it didn't work well in that sense. But if you have a piece of hardware, you can say, oh, I'm whatever, Sky or Roku. I have the app, the channel. Just come to me. I'll find a way. You pay a bit. That may be the attempt. But I'm against the I don't need the hardware normally. But again, so I think that's the tension maybe.
Definitely. So there are 2 things you call out there I'd like to touch on. One is the notion of micropayments. I think there is a real opportunity in the industry to say, fair enough, you don't want to be my subscriber forever, but would you pay 99 cents, more like EST as a transactional model, to experience this content? At the same time, because this is one of the things that we witnessed the whole way through my experience of being involved in running SVODs, was people want to share content they enjoy with their friends, with people, and then talk about it. And one of the things that we talked a lot about from a product perspective is, how do you gift an episode? How do you make somebody able to say, I'm going to bear the cost, in the same way that you'd buy a book and send it to a friend.
Yeah.
Right? And say, I really think you're going to enjoy this series. Here's an episode on me. Because I think that would dramatically change the consumption. There's too much content. We all know that. So we look for personal recommendations more than anything. So I think that's one part of the economics piece. The other piece, just to focus for a second on the hardware. The challenge even with hardware ownership is, for example, if I fire up my Apple TV and I want to watch Acorn TV. Acorn TV exists as a direct-to-consumer Acorn app. It exists as an Apple channel. Also, if I'm a Prime subscriber, there's an Apple TV Prime app.
Yes.
And if I log into that, I could have been an Acorn TV subscriber through Amazon. So immediately as a consumer, there's potentially 3 versions of Acorn on the same device, and I don't know what's different about them. And I don't know if I have an issue, whom to contact from a customer support perspective. So even if I own the device and I'm locking the customer in the same way that the MVPD audience has always done with set-top boxes, it's still confusing, because the app market is in and of itself fragmented and replicable.
No, it's a very complex scenario. I really liked our conversation, and thank you for taking the time. I hope you enjoy the day there in the US. And maybe we'll sync again in like 6-9 months to see if anything that we said has happened at any point.
That would be a pleasure.
Or not. Really appreciate your time. Thank you, Titus. Ciao.
Thank you, Carlo. Take care.